The Dragon Council Chamber of Valarath was a vast cavern carved deep beneath the volcanic mountains. Massive stone pillars rose like teeth from the floor, and the walls gleamed with crystals that caught the firelight. The council members were ancient and powerful, each one a ruler of their own territories. They sat in a circle, their scales shimmering in shades of crimson, gold, and emerald. The head of the council was a dragon named Aldrich. He was older than most of the others, with silver streaking through his dark scales. His eyes held the weight of centuries of leadership. Aldrich's voice was grave as he spoke to the assembled dragons. "Our greatest leader, King Theron, has fallen in battle," Aldrich announced. The words hung heavy in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "The invaders from the north have taken his life. We must choose a new leader quickly, or our kingdom will crumble into chaos and dust." The chamber erupted into noise immediately. Dragons began to roar and argue with each other, their voices echoing off the stone walls so loudly that the crystals vibrated with the sound. Some dragons pounded their claws on the ground in frustration. Others flapped their wings in agitation. The disagreement was fierce and passionate, with each dragon believing they knew what was best for the kingdom. "We need a dragon of pure blood and pure strength," shouted a warrior named Corvin. His scales were a deep red, the color of fresh blood. "Only a true dragon, born and raised in our ancient traditions, can lead our people into war against these northern invaders. We need someone who understands battle and courage." "Strength is not enough," said another dragon named Alara, her voice calm but firm. She was smaller than Corvin, but her eyes held an intelligence that many of the larger dragons did not possess. "We need wisdom. We need someone who can think beyond the next battle and see into the future. We need someone who can make decisions that will affect our children and our children's children." A third dragon, named Gerard, rose to his feet. "What we need is a dragon who has proven themselves in the old ways. Someone with a family line that stretches back through the ages. Someone whose ancestors have ruled with honor and strength. I propose that we choose from among the ancient houses." "That will only divide us further," said a smaller dragon named Nina. "The ancient houses have been fighting each other for generations. If we choose a leader from one of them, the others will feel cheated and abandoned. We will have civil war within our own borders before we can even face the external enemy." The arguments continued for hours. Dragons spoke passionately about their different ideas. Some wanted a military commander. Others wanted a scholar who could think strategically. Some wanted a member of the royal family. Others wanted someone completely new. The more they talked, the more divided they became. There seemed to be no answer that would satisfy everyone. Aldrich sat quietly on his throne, listening to all the arguments. His old eyes moved from dragon to dragon, observing their passion and their fear. He understood that the kingdom was in a critical moment. They needed a leader and they needed one quickly. But they also needed a leader that everyone could accept. If they chose badly, the kingdom would tear itself apart from within. Then a young voice spoke from the back of the chamber. It was quiet but clear, and somehow it cut through all the noise and chaos. "I nominate Edward." Everyone turned to look. It was a human, a young man with dark hair and kind eyes. His name was Owen, and he was the historian of the Dragon Kingdom. He had been orphaned as a child and raised by the dragons themselves, learning their language, their customs, and their ancient ways. Owen had spent his entire life studying the dragons, learning their history, understanding their culture. The chamber went silent. It was the silence of complete shock. Then a wave of outrage washed over the council like a tidal wave crashing against rocks. "A human?" Corvin roared so loudly that some of the smaller crystals fell from the ceiling and shattered on the stone floor. "You dare suggest a human to lead us? This is madness. This is an insult to everything we are." "Owen has lost his mind," said another dragon angrily. "The human has corrupted his thinking with his human ideas." "A human cannot lead dragons," said Gerard. "It goes against nature itself. Dragons are superior. We are ancient and powerful. How could we possibly follow a creature as weak and short-lived as a human?" But Aldrich raised his claw, and silence fell over the chamber once more. The old dragon's wisdom commanded respect, and even the angriest dragons fell silent. "Explain yourself, Owen," Aldrich commanded. His voice was not angry, but it was firm and demanding. "Give us your reasoning. Why would you suggest a human to lead the Dragon Kingdom of Valarath?" Owen stepped forward, his small human form looking even smaller surrounded by the massive dragons. But his voice was steady and his eyes were clear. "Edward is not a typical human," Owen said carefully. "He has studied our ways since he was a child. He understands our people better than most dragons understand each other. He speaks our language fluently. He has read every book in our libraries. He understands our history, our customs, and our traditions. He is intelligent and just. He treats all beings with respect, regardless of their station or their power. Owen paused, making sure he had everyone's attention before continuing. Most importantly, Owen said, Edward has no allegiance to any particular house or family. He cannot be bought by promises of wealth or land. He cannot be influenced by family loyalty or ancient rivalries. He can unite us because he does not favor one dragon over another. He sees the kingdom as a whole, not as separate competing houses. He cares about what is best for all of us, not what is best for his own family. This is insanity, Ilara said, but there was thoughtfulness in her voice rather than pure anger. Owen speaks of ideals, but the reality is that we need a strong leader, someone with power and authority. Can a human provide that? Perhaps, Aldrich said slowly. But Owen makes an interesting argument. The kingdom is deeply divided. Our own houses fight each other as much as we fight external enemies. Perhaps what we need is someone without ties to any of those houses. Someone who can see clearly without the weight of family history. The old dragon looked at Owen carefully. Let Edward speak, Aldrich commanded finally. If he is to be considered for this position, we must hear his words directly. A tall, lean man with intelligent eyes stepped forward from the shadows at the back of the chamber. This was Edward. He had lived among the dragons for most of his life. He wore simple clothes and carried no weapons, only knowledge and experience. His face was calm, but his eyes showed that he understood the enormity of what was being considered. I know that you doubt me, Edward said, his voice steady and clear despite his nervousness. I know that I am human and you are dragons. I know that I am weaker physically than any of you. I know that I will live only a fraction of the time that you will live. But I have learned from the greatest teacher in this kingdom, your own history. I have read about your greatest victories and your most terrible failures. I have studied the strategies of your greatest leaders. I have learned what brought you joy and what brought you pain. Edward took a breath and continued. I do not come to you claiming to be something I am not, Edward said. I do not claim to be a dragon. I do not claim to have your strength or your ancient power. I come to you asking for the chance to serve. I ask for your faith not because I am strong but because I have the wisdom to make the hard choices. I have studied how to lead not through force, but through understanding what each of you needs and desires. I believe that a kingdom united by common purpose is stronger than a kingdom divided by personal ambition. The council members looked at each other. Some shook their heads in disapproval, their minds already made up. Others seemed to consider his words seriously, thinking deeply about what he had said. Let us vote, Aldrich commanded. The voting was close, but Edward won by a narrow margin. 7 dragons voted for him and 6 voted against him. 1 dragon abstained, unable to make a decision. Edward was officially declared the new leader of the Dragon Kingdom of Valarath. The council would serve under him, but ultimate authority now rested with the human. Edward bowed respectfully to the council, placing his hand over his heart. I will not fail you, Edward said firmly. I will lead this kingdom with honor and wisdom. I will protect you from external threats. I will heal the divisions within our own houses. I will make decisions based on what is best for all of you, not what is best for any individual or family. But as he looked into the eyes of the dragons around him, he could see clearly that many of them were not happy with this decision. Some looked angry. Some looked skeptical. Some looked completely opposed to what had just happened. Edward understood that winning a vote was not the same as winning respect. The real challenge was only just beginning. He would have to prove himself through action, not through words. Earning the genuine respect of these powerful ancient creatures would be far more difficult than simply being appointed their leader through a vote. Edward walked out of the council chamber that night feeling the weight of his new position settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. The first week of Edward's leadership was a disaster. The dragon generals refused to follow his orders in the war council. When Edward suggested a strategic retreat to protect the kingdom's northern flank, General Corvin laughed openly. A human knows nothing of war, Corvin said, his voice dripping with contempt. We will not retreat like cowards because of human fear. This is exactly what I warned against. A weak human cannot lead dragons in battle. Edward sat at the head of the war council table, surrounded by maps and battle plans. He had spent the entire night studying the kingdom's defensive positions and analyzing the enemy's likely movements. He believed he had found a critical weakness in their northern defenses. If they did not address this weakness soon, the invading army would exploit it and pour through like water through a broken dam. General Corvin, Edward said calmly, trying to keep his voice steady. This is not about fear. This is about strategy. If we spread our forces too thin across too many locations, the enemy will find our weakest point and attack there. By pulling back our forces and consolidating them, we can create a stronger defensive line. That sounds like cowardice to me, said another general named Victor. He was younger than Corvin but just as aggressive. The dragons have never retreated. We stand and fight. That is the dragon way. The dragon way is to survive, Edward replied. What good is pride if the kingdom falls? What good is standing your ground if you die doing it? The generals stared at Edward with expressions ranging from anger to contempt. It was clear that they did not respect his opinion. They saw him as a human playing at being a military strategist, and they believed their own instincts and experience were far more valuable than his analysis. We will not retreat, Corvin said finally, his voice like stone. And we will not follow the orders of a human who does not understand the nature of dragon warfare. Generals, we are adjourned. We will continue our operations as planned. The generals walked out of the council chamber, completely ignoring Edward's attempts to stop them. Edward sat alone at the table, staring at his maps and plans, feeling the weight of his powerlessness pressing down on him. In the throne room, things were even worse. A powerful warlord dragon named Crag, who ruled the eastern territories, arrived at the palace with a group of armed followers. He walked directly to where Edward was sitting on the throne and stood before him with his claws crossed over his chest. I have come to tell you something, Crag said, his voice carrying through the entire throne room. I do not recognize you as my leader. I do not recognize your authority over my territories or my people. I will rule my own lands as I see fit, and you have no say in what I do. Edward rose from his throne, trying to appear confident even though he felt anything but. Crag, Edward said, the council voted to make me the leader of this kingdom. That vote includes you and your territories. You cannot simply reject that decision now. I can and I will, Crag replied coldly. That vote was a mistake. The kingdom made a terrible choice when it chose a human to lead dragons. I am changing my decision. I withdraw my support for you, and I declare my territories independent of your rule. Before Edward could respond, Crag turned and walked out of the throne room, his followers marching behind him in perfect formation. Other dragons began to follow Crag's example. Within days, several other regional leaders had also declared their independence or withdrawn their support. The kingdom, which had been on the edge of unity when Edward took power, now began to fracture into separate factions again. In the libraries and halls of the palace, whispers began to spread. Dragons spoke in hushed tones about how foolish the council had been to choose a human. They questioned whether Edward could really lead them. Some dragons began to openly mock him, calling him the human pretender, or the child who thinks he can rule dragons. Edward spent his days trying to maintain some semblance of order and control, but nothing seemed to work. When he gave orders, they were ignored or only half obeyed. When he tried to make decisions, other dragons would undermine them or make contradictory decisions in their own territories. The kingdom was falling apart, and Edward seemed powerless to stop it. One night, Edward sat alone in his private chamber, surrounded by books and documents. He had been trying to learn everything he could about dragon leadership, dragon strategy, and dragon culture. He hoped that if he studied hard enough, he would find some key that would help him understand how to lead these powerful creatures. But no matter how much he read, he could not find an answer. A soft knock came at the door. Edward looked up to see Helena entering the chamber. Helena was a younger dragon, with scales that shimmered like deep purple gemstones. She was one of the few dragons who had supported Edward's appointment from the beginning, and she was one of the few who still treated him with respect. You look exhausted, Helena said, her voice filled with concern. I am failing, Edward admitted. The generals do not listen to me. Crag has declared independence. Other dragons are abandoning their support. In just 1 week, I have destroyed the fragile unity that existed when I took power. I am a terrible leader. Helena sat down beside Edward, her massive form making the chair creak under her weight. You are not failing because you are a bad leader, Helena said. You are struggling because you are trying to lead like a dragon and you are not a dragon. The dragons expect you to rule through strength and dominance. But that is not your strength. That is not what you were meant to do. Then what am I supposed to do? Edward asked in frustration. If I cannot rule like a dragon and I cannot rule like a human, what can I do? Helena was silent for a long moment. You are doubting yourself, Helena said finally. It was not a question. You are wondering if you made a mistake accepting this position. You are wondering if the council made a mistake choosing you. You are wondering if you should just give up and admit that you are not worthy. Edward did not answer, but his silence confirmed everything Helena had said. Listen to me carefully, Helena said, her voice becoming more serious. Doubt is normal. Fear is normal. Every true leader has experienced what you are experiencing right now. The question is not whether you will doubt yourself. The question is what you will do despite that doubt. But the dragons do not believe in me, Edward said. No, Helena agreed. They do not. But that is not your fault. You cannot control what they believe. You can only control what you do. You can only control how you respond to their doubt and rejection. I do not know how to prove myself to them, Edward said. I have already tried reasoning with them. I have tried strategic planning. I have tried treating them with respect. Nothing works. They simply see a weak human and nothing else. Helena stood up and walked toward the window that looked out over the kingdom. The night sky was dark, and the volcanic mountains in the distance glowed faintly with the light of lava. You are thinking about this wrong, Helena said. You do not need to prove yourself to them through the methods they understand. You need to do something that no dragon has ever done. You need to accomplish something that will change how they see you completely. What could possibly do that? Edward asked. Helena turned back to look at Edward, and there was a strange expression on her face, a mixture of excitement and fear. There is a legend, Helena said quietly. A story that has been passed down through the ages. It is about a dragon so powerful and so wild that no other dragon has ever been able to approach him. His name is Inferno. No one has seen him in over 200 years. Most dragons believe he is just a myth, a story told to children. But I believe he is real. And I believe that if you could somehow reach him, if you could somehow communicate with him, it might change everything. How would that help? Edward asked. Because, Helena said, if you could do something that no dragon has ever been able to do, if you could accomplish something that is considered impossible, then even the dragons who doubt you would have to acknowledge your worth. They would have to see that you are more than just a weak human. They would have to see that you possess something special. But where would I even find this Inferno? Edward asked. And even if I found him, how would I communicate with a dragon that is said to be completely wild and uncontrollable? That, Helena said with a slight smile, is something you will have to figure out for yourself. But I believe in you, Edward. I believe that you have the courage and the wisdom to attempt something that seems impossible. And I believe that if you succeed, the entire kingdom will change. Edward sat in the darkness of his chamber long after Helena had left, thinking about her words. The task she had described seemed completely impossible. Finding a legendary dragon that no one had seen in 200 years. Communicating with a creature that was said to be wild and dangerous and uncontrollable. It seemed like madness. But Edward also understood that he had nothing to lose. His current approach was clearly not working. The dragons were rejecting him. The kingdom was fracturing. If he did not do something drastic, something that would change how the dragons saw him, he would eventually be deposed and replaced. As the sun rose the next morning, Edward made a decision. He would leave the palace. He would venture into the volcanic mountains. He would search for Inferno. And somehow he would find a way to reach the legendary dragon and prove to the kingdom that he was worthy to lead them. Edward gathered what few supplies he would need and prepared to leave. He told no one where he was going. Some of the servants saw him leave, but no one tried to stop him. Perhaps they thought he had finally given up and abandoned his position. Perhaps they thought he had gone mad. But Edward knew what he had to do. He walked out of the palace and into the mountains, carrying nothing but hope and determination, toward a meeting that would change his life forever. Everyone in the chamber fell silent at the mention of Inferno. Inferno was a legendary dragon, spoken of only in whispers and ancient stories. No one had seen him in over 200 years. Some said he was a myth, a creature that had never truly existed. Others said he was real but had been trapped in the volcanic mountains, a prisoner of his own power and his own wild nature. The legend said that Inferno was the most powerful dragon ever born. His scales were said to be like molten gold, shimmering and glowing with an inner fire. His wings were so vast that when he spread them, they could eclipse the entire sky and block out the sun itself. His roar was said to be so loud and so terrible that it could shake the earth and cause mountains to crumble into dust. His breath was pure fire, hotter than the heart of a volcano, hot enough to melt stone and turn sand into glass. But Inferno was also said to be completely uncontrollable. He could not be reasoned with. He could not be taught or trained. He could not be tamed or directed. His mind was wild and chaotic, filled with rage and loneliness and pain. Some said that Inferno had been born with too much power, that his body and mind could not contain the strength that flowed through him. Others said that he had been driven mad by loneliness, isolated from other dragons because they feared him so much. The legend also told stories of dragons who had tried to approach Inferno. There was the story of General Corvus, a great warrior who had led an army of 1,000 dragons to confront Inferno. According to the legend, Inferno had destroyed them all with a single blast of fire. There was the story of Lady Sarah, a wise dragon who had tried to communicate with Inferno using ancient magic. The legend said that Inferno had destroyed her, along with everything around her, in a fit of rage. There was the story of Prince Marcus, a young and brave dragon who had ventured alone to Inferno's lair to try to befriend him. The legend said that Prince Marcus had never returned. Because of these stories, most dragons had learned to fear Inferno and to speak of him only in whispers, if they spoke of him at all. Many young dragons were told stories of Inferno at bedtime, stories meant to teach them to respect the power of nature and to understand their own limitations. "You want me to find Inferno?" Edward asked, shocked by the suggestion. "You want me to seek out the most dangerous creature in existence?" "Not just find him," Aldrich said carefully. "I want you to communicate with him. I want you to help him understand that we are not his enemies. I want you to bring peace to a being that has known only rage and isolation for 200 years. If you can do this, if you can accomplish what no dragon has ever accomplished, then the dragons of Valarath will know that you are worthy of leading them. They will know that you possess a kind of strength that goes beyond physical power." Crag laughed, a harsh and terrible sound that echoed through the council chamber. "This is a death sentence in disguise," Crag said. "You are sending the human to die. You are pretending that this is a test, but really you are just trying to get rid of him. Why don't you just admit it? Why don't you just say that you do not want him as your leader either?" "Perhaps," Aldrich said calmly. "But if Edward succeeds, we will know that he is more than just a human playing at being a leader. We will know that he is truly our king. And if he fails, well, at least we will have tried to give him a chance to prove himself." Edward felt fear and determination warring inside his chest. This was an impossible task. The legendary dragon Inferno was said to be dangerous beyond measure. Approaching him would almost certainly result in death. But Edward also understood that this was his only chance. If he refused this challenge, it would prove to the entire kingdom that he was indeed a coward and unworthy of leadership. If he accepted and failed, he would be dead, and at least he would have tried. But if he somehow succeeded, if he somehow managed to accomplish what no dragon had ever accomplished, it would change everything. Edward took a deep breath and made his decision. "I will find Inferno," Edward said, his voice steady despite his fear. "I will bring him peace. I will show him that there is a place for him in this kingdom, and that he does not have to be alone anymore." The next morning, Edward set out alone into the volcanic mountains. He carried only a small pack with food and water, and a journal to record his thoughts and observations. He wore simple clothes that would not hinder his movement, and he carried no weapons. He understood that weapons would be useless against a dragon as powerful as Inferno anyway. The mountains were dangerous and beautiful at the same time. Steep cliffs rose on either side of Edward as he walked through narrow canyons. In some places the stone was so hot that his shoes began to wear away and his feet burned. In other places he had to cross streams of molten rock, using stones and fallen trees as bridges. The air was thick with smoke and ash, and it made his eyes water and his throat hurt. Edward followed the ancient legends that described Inferno's lair. According to the stories, Inferno lived deep within the heart of the volcanic mountains, in a place that was so hot and so dangerous that no normal creature could survive there. It was said to be a chamber of pure fire, where the walls themselves were made of lava and the ground burned beneath your feet. Days passed. Edward climbed through burning canyons and crossed streams of molten rock. His clothes were burned and torn. His skin was blistered from the heat. His lips were cracked and dry from the hot air. His body ached with exhaustion. But still he continued, driven forward by determination and the knowledge that he had no choice but to succeed. He passed the ruins of ancient structures that seemed to have been destroyed by fire. He found bones of creatures that had tried to survive in this harsh environment and failed. He saw signs of Inferno's presence everywhere: scorched earth, melted stone, the smell of sulfur and smoke. Finally, after 7 days of walking through the volcanic mountains, Edward reached a massive cavern. The entrance was so large that 100 dragons could have walked through it side by side. The walls of the cavern glowed with a dull orange light, as if they were radiating heat from deep within the earth. Edward approached the entrance carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that somewhere inside this cavern was Inferno, the legendary dragon that had been feared and avoided for 200 years. Edward did not know if he would live to see another sunrise, but he knew that he had to try. He took a deep breath and walked into the cavern. The heat inside was almost unbearable. It felt as if Edward was walking into the heart of a star. Sweat poured down his face and soaked his clothes. His eyes watered from the intensity of the heat. His breathing became shallow and rapid as the hot air burned his lungs. But Edward continued forward, moving deeper and deeper into the cavern. And then he saw it. Inferno was sleeping on a bed of hot stone in the center of the great cavern. The dragon was even more enormous than Edward had imagined. His body was so large that it seemed to fill the entire space. His scales truly did shimmer like molten gold, glowing with an inner light that seemed to come from his very soul. His wings, folded against his body, seemed impossibly vast and powerful. Even in sleep, the legendary dragon radiated an aura of raw power and danger. Edward approached slowly, carefully, hardly daring to breathe. Each step forward felt like a step closer to death. Every instinct in his body told him to run, to flee this place, to give up this impossible quest. But Edward had come too far to turn back now. He was committed to this path whatever the consequences might be. Inferno's eyes opened suddenly. They were like burning suns, filled with ancient fire and terrible loneliness and barely controlled rage. The legendary dragon rose to his feet, towering above the small human, his massive form casting shadows that danced across the walls of the cavern. Edward could feel the heat radiating from Inferno's body. He could sense the raw power barely contained within the dragon's massive form. He could see in those burning eyes that Inferno was confused by the presence of this small human who had dared to walk into his lair. And Edward understood that this was the moment that would determine his fate. Inferno's eyes opened suddenly. They were like burning suns, filled with ancient fire and terrible loneliness. The legendary dragon rose to his feet, towering above the small human. Edward could feel the heat radiating from Inferno's body. He could sense the raw power barely contained within the dragon's massive form. Edward should have been terrified. Every instinct told him to run. But instead, he stood still and looked into Inferno's eyes. "Hello," Edward said quietly. "My name is Edward. I have come to talk with you if you will allow it." Inferno's head moved closer, his great nostrils flaring as he sniffed the human. Edward could feel the dragon's warm breath washing over him. The smell was like sulfur and ancient fire. Edward could see the confusion in the legendary dragon's eyes. No human had ever approached him willingly before. All the others had come with weapons or magic trying to control him or destroy him. But this one came alone with nothing but words and a calm voice. For a long moment, neither the dragon nor the human moved. They simply looked at each other, one ancient and powerful beyond measure, the other small and fragile but determined. "Why have you come?" Inferno's voice was like thunder rolling across mountains and through deep canyons. It was so loud that Edward could feel it vibrating through his entire body. The sound of Inferno's voice alone was enough to make most creatures flee in terror. But Edward did not flee. He stood his ground and spoke calmly. "I came because the dragons of my kingdom sent me," Edward said. "They wanted me to find you and convince you to help us. They believed that if you agreed to join us, we could defend our kingdom against the invaders from the north. But now that I am here, I realize that is not really why I came. I came because I wanted to meet you. I came because I wanted to understand you. I came because I was curious about the creature that all the other dragons fear so much." Inferno made a sound like a growl, a deep rumbling that shook the stone beneath Edward's feet. But it was not immediately an angry sound. It seemed more like confusion. "Why would you want to understand me?" Inferno asked. "I am dangerous. I am wild. I have destroyed everything that has ever tried to control me or hurt me. Why would you not fear me?" "Because I have lived among dragons my entire life," Edward said carefully. "I have learned that dragons are more complex than they appear. You feel loneliness. You feel anger. You feel the desire to be understood and accepted just like any other being. I can see all of that in your eyes right now." Inferno's great head moved back slightly. His burning eyes studied the small human with what seemed like genuine interest. "The other dragons sent a human to speak with me," Inferno said. "This is new. Usually they send warriors with weapons and magic. Those warriors always try to hurt me. I always destroy them. It is the only interaction I have ever known." "I know," Edward said. "I have heard the stories. General Corvus and his army. Lady Sarah and her magic. Prince Marcus and his bravery. But those dragons came to you with aggression and with the intention to control you or kill you. I have not come to hurt you or control you. I have come simply to talk." For a long moment Inferno did not respond. The legendary dragon seemed to be thinking, considering this strange situation. A human standing alone in his lair, not attacking, not fleeing, simply speaking. Very well, Inferno said finally. We will talk. But first tell me, are you not afraid? Edward considered the question carefully before answering. Yes, Edward said honestly. I am very much afraid. Your power is beyond anything I have ever experienced. But I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite fear. I am afraid, but I believe that understanding is more important than fear. Something changed in Inferno's expression. His burning eyes seemed to soften slightly, though they still held their ancient fire. Sit, Inferno commanded, gesturing to a large flat stone nearby. Edward sat down, grateful to rest his tired legs. He placed his small pack beside him and pulled out some of his remaining food and water. May I ask you something? Edward said. You may, Inferno replied. Why do you stay here? Edward asked. Why do you remain in this cavern, isolated from the rest of the world? You are the most powerful dragon in existence. You could go anywhere, do anything. But instead, you stay alone in this place of fire and ash. Inferno was quiet for a very long time. His massive form seemed to settle down onto the ground, as if the weight of old memories was pressing down on him. I stay here because this is where I was born, Inferno said finally. I was born in this volcano during a great eruption. The other dragons came and took me away because they feared my power. They tried to train me, to teach me, to control me. But I could not be controlled. My power was too great. My instincts were too wild. I destroyed things accidentally just by existing near them. I hurt dragons simply by trying to interact with them. Inferno paused, and Edward could hear genuine pain in the dragon's voice. Eventually the other dragons decided that I was too dangerous, Inferno continued. They sealed me in this cavern using ancient magic and powerful spells. They said it was for everyone's safety, including my own. I have been imprisoned here for 200 years. I have been alone for 200 years. No one has come to visit me. No one has tried to speak with me. Until you. Edward felt a deep sadness wash over him. He understood now why Inferno was so wild and so angry. The legendary dragon was not evil or intentionally destructive. He was simply lonely. He had been isolated and rejected, treated as a problem to be solved rather than as a being worthy of understanding and compassion. I am sorry, Edward said quietly. That must have been terrible. Being locked away for so long. Being feared instead of understood. It was, Inferno said. But what choice did I have? I could not control my own power. The other dragons could not control me either. So I was locked away, forgotten, left to exist alone with my fire and my rage. Edward sat quietly, thinking about what Inferno had told him. Then he made a decision. I came here planning to ask you to help my kingdom, Edward said. I came here planning to convince you to leave this place and join us in battle against our enemies. But that is not what I am going to do. Instead, I am going to tell you about my kingdom. I am going to tell you about a place where you might truly belong. I am going to tell you about a possibility that I think you have never considered. Edward spent the entire night talking with Inferno. He sat on the stone and told the legendary dragon everything. He told him about the kingdom of Valarath and its struggles. He told him about the divisions between the dragon houses. He told him about the external threat from the northern invaders. He told him about his own journey, about how he had been rejected and doubted and mocked because he was different from everyone else. Most importantly, he told Inferno about what it meant to be understood and accepted, even when you were different. He told the legendary dragon about his own experiences of being an outsider, of being judged by those who did not understand him. Inferno listened to every word. As the night wore on, something seemed to shift inside the legendary dragon. His burning eyes, which had held only rage and loneliness before, began to show something else. They began to show hope. Why should I help you? Inferno asked as dawn approached. Why should I leave this place that is my prison and my home? Why should I trust that I will be accepted instead of feared? Because, Edward said, you deserve to be part of something greater than yourself. You deserve to be understood. You deserve to know what it feels like to have someone see you not as a weapon or a problem but as yourself. Your true self. The dragon beneath the legend. Because the world needs you, not as a force of destruction but as a being with power and wisdom and feeling. And because I believe in you even when you do not believe in yourself. Inferno was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended one of his massive claws toward Edward. The claw was as large as a human arm, tipped with a point as sharp as a sword. Edward reached out and placed his small hand on Inferno's great claw. His human hand looked impossibly small against the legendary dragon's enormous appendage, But in that moment, Edward felt a connection forming between them. "Very well," Inferno said. "I will go with you. I will help your kingdom. But I do this not because you asked me to fight. I do this because you showed me compassion when everyone else showed me only fear. I do this because you saw me as something other than a monster. I do this because you offered me something I thought I would never have again: understanding." In that moment, a bond was formed between the human and the legendary dragon, not the bond of master and servant, not the bond of conqueror and conquered, but the bond of friendship and mutual respect between two beings who understood what it meant to be different and alone in a world that did not always accept them. As the sun rose over the volcanic mountains, Edward and Inferno walked together toward the entrance of the cavern. The journey back to the kingdom would be long, but neither of them was alone anymore. They had each other, and that was enough. Edward and Inferno emerged from the volcanic mountains on the 7th day. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had formed a strong connection. Inferno had told Edward stories of the ancient times, of the first dragons and their greatest wars. Edward had shared human wisdom and perspective with the legendary dragon. By the time they reached the kingdom, they were no longer strangers. They were partners. When they arrived at the throne room of Valarath, every dragon present gasped in shock and awe. Inferno was magnificent beyond imagination. His scales glowed like molten gold in the torchlight, shimmering and shifting with an inner fire that seemed alive and conscious. His wings, spread wide to show his full glory, seemed to fill the entire throne room. Each wingspan was so vast that it stretched from one side of the chamber to the other. His presence was overwhelming, ancient, and powerful beyond measure. The air around him seemed to shimmer with heat and raw energy. His eyes still burned with ancient fire, but now they also held something else: intelligence, wisdom, and a strange kind of peace. But what shocked the dragons most was the sight of Edward walking beside him. The small human was not cowering or hiding behind the legendary dragon. Edward walked with confidence and composure, his head held high. He was not a captive or a servant. He was a companion. He was a partner. The dragons in the throne room began to whisper to each other. How was this possible? How had the human not been destroyed? How had he survived in the presence of the legendary dragon? Some dragons looked at Edward with newfound respect. Others looked confused and uncertain. Crag stepped backward, his earlier confidence completely shattered. His eyes grew wide and his scales seemed to lose some of their color. "This is impossible," Crag whispered. His voice was barely audible, but in the silence of the throne room, everyone could hear him. "This cannot be real. The human is dead. He must be dead. No one survives an encounter with Inferno." "And yet here I am," Edward said, his voice carrying across the chamber with authority and calm. "I brought Inferno here not as a weapon to be used, but as an ally to be respected. I did not conquer him through force or trickery. I showed him compassion instead of fear. I spoke to him with respect instead of commands. I treated him as a being worthy of understanding instead of as a monster to be destroyed. And he came." Inferno nodded his massive head slowly. The movement was deliberate and powerful. When the legendary dragon spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber like the sound of an avalanche. "This human is wise," Inferno declared. His words seemed to echo off the stone walls. "He is wiser than many dragons I have known. He is worthy to lead you. I have decided to stay in this kingdom and serve under his command. I have decided to be part of his vision for a better future. If any of you question his authority, if any of you challenge his right to lead, you will answer to me. You will face the legendary dragon that you have feared for 200 years. Choose your next words and your next actions very carefully." The effect of Inferno's declaration was immediate and complete. Dragons who had challenged Edward just days before now fell to their knees in submission. The rebel factions that had been forming crumbled instantly. Crag, who had declared his territories independent, rushed forward and fell to his knees before Edward. "I was wrong," Crag said, his voice shaking with fear and shame. "I was foolish and prideful. I pledge my allegiance to you, Edward. I pledge my territories and my people to your service. I ask for your forgiveness." Other dragons came forward one by one, offering their support and their loyalty. Even General Corvin, who had laughed at Edward's strategic suggestions, approached the human leader with respect in his eyes. "You have proven yourself," Corvin said. "You have accomplished what no dragon could accomplish. You deserve our respect and our loyalty." Aldrich approached Edward slowly. The old dragon's eyes were filled with tears of joy and pride. "I knew from the moment I heard Owen suggest your name that you were special," Aldrich said. "But I never imagined that you would accomplish something as extraordinary as this. You have not just united the kingdom. You have brought back the legendary dragon. You have changed everything. Edward bowed respectfully to the old council leader. I could not have done this without the support of Helena and the faith that you showed in me when others doubted, Edward said. I came into this position as an outsider, unwelcome and unproven. But you gave me a chance, and now I intend to honor that trust. Over the following weeks and months, Edward's reign as leader of the Dragons of Valarath began in earnest. He worked alongside the Dragon Council to rebuild the kingdom and prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. The northern invaders, hearing rumors of Inferno's return to the kingdom, began to retreat back toward their own lands. They realized that they could not possibly defeat a kingdom led by a wise human and protected by the legendary dragon. Inferno became Edward's greatest ally and friend. The legendary dragon helped Edward bridge the gap between dragons and humans, showing that different species could work together and understand each other. Young dragons came to study under Edward's guidance, learning not just tactics and strategy, but wisdom and compassion. Inferno would sometimes sit with these young dragons and tell them stories of the ancient times, sharing knowledge that had been lost to history. The bond between Edward and Inferno grew stronger with each passing day. They would spend hours discussing philosophy and strategy. They would walk together through the kingdom, showing the dragons and the people that their leader was not isolated or distant, but accessible and present. Inferno would sometimes allow young dragons to ride on his back, something that no other dragon had ever been allowed to do, showing the kingdom that the legendary dragon could be gentle and kind despite his enormous power. Slowly, the culture of Valarath began to change. Dragons began to value wisdom and understanding as much as they valued strength and power. The divisions between the different dragon houses began to heal. Dragons and humans who had never before cooperated began to work side by side in many endeavors. Trade increased. The borders were secure. Peace came to a kingdom that had known only conflict and division. Years passed. The kingdom of Valarath became stronger and more unified than it had ever been before. Stories of Edward's accomplishments spread to other kingdoms. Other leaders began to ask themselves if perhaps they too had been wrong about choosing strength over wisdom, power over understanding. One day, a group of young dragons came to Edward in the throne room. They bowed respectfully, their movements graceful and humble. Edward, one of them said, her voice filled with curiosity, we have heard the story of how you tamed Inferno and united the kingdom. We have heard how you accomplished something that no dragon could accomplish. We want to know, what is your secret? How were you able to do something that seems so impossible? How were you able to accomplish what all the dragons before you could not do? Edward smiled. He looked at Inferno, who sat beside the throne, his golden scales still shimmering with ancient power. The legendary dragon nodded, encouraging Edward to answer the question. The secret, Edward said carefully, is simple, though it is not easy to follow. I did not try to conquer or control. I tried to understand. I did not see Inferno as a problem to be solved. I saw him as a being worthy of respect and compassion. When you approach others with genuine care and a true desire to understand them, rather than with fear and aggression, you can accomplish things that seem impossible. Edward stood and walked toward the young dragons. I was raised by dragons, Edward continued. I have learned that strength is not just about physical power or size. Strength is about having the courage to be different, to stand alone if necessary, and to offer kindness to those the world has taught you to fear. That is true strength. That is wisdom. And that is what will make any kingdom great. Inferno rumbled with approval, a sound like distant thunder that carried through the entire palace. The human speaks truth, Inferno said. I have lived for centuries and I have seen much. But I have never known anything as powerful as the wisdom and compassion that Edward possesses. I was a being of rage and loneliness for 200 years. But Edward showed me that there was another way to exist. He showed me that even the most powerful and feared creature can find peace and acceptance. The young dragons listened carefully, understanding that they were hearing words of truth from a leader who had proven himself through action, not through words alone. They were hearing wisdom from a dragon who had lived for centuries and a human who had accomplished the impossible. Edward had come to Valarath as an orphan, a human child raised by dragons who had been assigned to lead them. He had become a leader not because he was born to power, but because he understood something that many others had forgotten, that compassion and wisdom are more powerful than any force, and that the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from connection and understanding. And so the age of Edward and Inferno began, an age of unity, peace, and understanding. The dragons of Valarath learned that a human could be their greatest leader. The human had learned that he truly belonged among them. And Inferno, the legendary dragon who had been feared and isolated for centuries, had finally found what he had always been searching for, a place where he was understood and valued, where his power could be used for good, and where he was no longer alone. The kingdom prospered. The people were happy. And the legend of Edward and Inferno spread throughout the world, inspiring other leaders to choose wisdom over force, compassion over fear, and understanding over conflict. In the great throne room of Valarath, a human sat on a throne beside a legendary dragon, and together they built a kingdom that would be remembered for generations to come. A kingdom where the impossible had become possible, where a human and a dragon had become the greatest of friends, and where the power of understanding had proven to be stronger than any weapon.